And
Yep.
straight away, off the top, we've got to talk about Bob Caudle. He passed away at the age of 95.
Wow.
So, Middle Atlantic Gateway social media posted this. I think they made the announcement. It is with a very sad heart that I report that Bob Caudle has passed away. He was 95 years old. His son Mike wrote this morning that Bob passed away peacefully in his sleep overnight. Our thoughts, prayers, and love go out to the family. More information forthcoming. I've got a lot to talk about with Bob here, but for many fans from, I guess, from the 50s to even the mid-90s, if you're in the right area for Smoky Mountain, of course, he was the voice of multiple generations as far as
Oh, he
wrestling
was.
goes. Was he one of the first
Okay,
commentators you heard?
I agree. He was one of the first wrestling announcers that I heard, and this was back probably in the 60s. I'm not going to date myself, but I'm older than water too. But and you hear a voice, and I'm thinking, this. Even then, I was a kid. I was maybe 10, 12, something like that. But I hear Bob Caudle, the voice of the show, very smooth, very polished, never got stuck for a word, or he didn't trip over his words or anything. He was very, very good. And that's when I first started watching wrestling. And somebody asked me one time, I tell these stories, then I get off on a side story, but that's what the whole thing's about. But somebody said, "Did you really want to be a wrestler?" And I says, "Well, not really. I just kind of tripped into it because my older brother, wanted to be a wrestler. And that's where I kind of picked up the bug from him. I don't call it a bug anymore. I call it a disease now. It's an incurable disease. But yeah, and Bob Caudle was the voice of Jim Crockett Promotions, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And it took me years to figure, well, not years, but it took me a while to figure out how the country was separated and picked up by wrestling promotions. And I've said this before. I think when I started, they had like 32 or 34 different promotions in the country, Mexico and Canada, maybe more than that. But so really, if you got in the business, you had 20 years without going back to the same territory twice. Easy. Now, some of them you could make money, and some of them you couldn't. I don't know. But the ones you wanted to try to get to would be Florida. Good money in Florida. They drew well. Carolinas drew well. Georgia drew well. Later on, Tennessee. Of course, you may get screwed on your money in Tennessee. And that's what it was noted for. And Texas. And the old WWWF. Back then, it was good. California, I never heard that much about. I heard San Francisco, which was good. But for a guy from the East Coast, me going to San Francisco was like going around the world. I said, what if I go out there and all of a sudden they fire me, or I don't have any way to make money? How am I going to even get back? How could I even get gas money to get back? So, and I had a chance to go to Calgary one time, and the same thing, distance overcame me. I looked we didn't used to have Google Maps. We would actually look on an actual map. And when you lay the country out, that's a big map. And I said, I don't know. That's a lot of miles. If something happens, I have to get back quick. So, and that's how I finally learned how many promotions there were in the country. You had another question.
No, it's just, well, we established, yeah, so Bob Caudle is going to be one of the first voices you heard.
Very, very nice guy. I never heard a curse word, and that's rare in the wrestling business. I never heard a cuss word come out of that man's mouth. I never heard him say anything off center to anybody. He was always friendly. And Bob, if you saw Bob last week, he'd be the same Bob you're going to see next week. He didn't change because he made a career out of broadcasting. And I don't know where he was from originally. I think from that area, Virginia, somewhere. I don't know. I never asked him. Where's he from? Does it say?
I can find out in a minute. Jim Ross said that he was a former TV newsman at WRAL TV in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Raleigh.
So I imagine, somewhere around there.
He was from there. He'd been around for years. He was a local announcer, and how he got his start in Jim Crockett Promotions, I can only assume that probably they had their show on one of the stations that he worked at, and he met them through there, and he got their information, and he probably just called them up one day and told them he'd be interested in working for them, and he did it, and it worked out, and he was with them forever. I mean, he was the first voice I heard, and I know up to Jim Crockett stopped their shows, he was still working with them. Then he filled in with Smoky Mountain and some of the others, but he never lost his love for wrestling.
I was going to ask, was he like a big wrestling fan, or was he just a job that he was doing for decades? To answer your question, he was a weatherman at the same place where they filmed the wrestling, so they were in the same building pretty much.
Well, and that's probably how you met him. Was he a big wrestling fan? I don't know. But when he announced, I mean, he announced like a fan, and of course he would share the enthusiasm of what the fans were seeing in the ring. And when you heard him, he was one of the reasons you may want to go see the match, because he had so much enthusiasm behind him. You could tell it, but just in his voice. And, when they say, the Mount Rushmore of announcers, you always got Jim Ross and Gordon Soley, Lance Russell, and I would put Bob Caudle up there on that Mount Rushmore he's carved into the mountain. He was that good.
So Jim Ross would say previously that he is the most underrated pro wrestling broadcaster ever. Is it just because he was like unflappable, but he wasn't like, I guess, brimming over with over enthusiasm or forced enthusiasm kind of thing, but was he just the kind of guy who was just unflappable and did his job and very, very professional and did it well?
See, I was going to bring a tape. Now I've forgotten it now. I would always bring, to start of the Smoky Mountain program, I would bring a little poster board with me, and I would say things on it like, does Bob really dye his hair? And I'd look in his hair, and then I'd put the poster away. And Bob said, what did the sign say, Dutch? I said, oh, nothing. You wouldn't be interested in it. And go on and announce the show. He never said or argued about anything that I had on the poster. And he could say anything, it was just stupid. It was just different that you never had that in opening a wrestling show. And I never got into an argument with him. If I disagreed with him, well, I just disagreed with him. He never would make it an issue. I actually saw one day Paul Dangerously and Jim Ross on an Atlanta show. They actually got into an argument, and you could tell. No, I'm saying, oh boy, he's pissed off Jim now, and now they're trying to outdo each other. So I bet I would like to be a fly on the wall if they went back in the dressing room and that was brought up. See, you're taught as an announcer, don't fight with your co-host, because that takes the emphasis off. Hell, I wanted to see the match between Jim Ross and Dangerously Heyman more than I wanted to see the match in the ring, because it was more interesting. But Bob never did that. He would always give you the respect and the common courtesy of just go along with you, and the show moved. I mean, he would move a show along. If he's in the microphone is in his ear, and they said, okay, we're going to commercial in 10, 9, they'd count him down and he'd finish up. He was listening to the count while finishing up. We'll be right back, folks. And boom, he's right there. Very good at it.
So, obviously, Bob Caudle's, the longtime voice of Mid-Atlantic. I suppose the first time you actually met him would have been 86 when you went to Jim Crockett Promotions, or did you encounter him earlier?
No, I met him there.
Yeah.
And he was as nice there as he was in Smoky Mountain. But I had never hosted a show with him because Jimmy called me and wanted me to help him out. But he didn't want me as a wrestler, which I'm kind of glad. He wanted me to be the announcer with Bob Caudle. And so when I went up and I says, I met him and he knew that I was going to be the co-host. He was fine. He was great. And I said, anything I should know? He said, nope, just follow the format. And guess how long we talked about the first 2 or 3 shows? 0. We just went out there and winged it. And it just flew.
That was Bob Caudle's last gig, or last regular gig. Was that?
Yeah, because Vince had pushed. I call it the mom and pops, did little individual territories. He had pushed them to the bankruptcy point or the starvation point. They could no longer afford to stay in business and pay talent. They couldn't do it. They couldn't pay for talent. I mean, they could pay if they wanted to, but they're just losing money. Production, announcers, TV time, and all this kind of stuff. They just couldn't afford it. So, and that was Vince's whole push when he started the company, was when he put his slick production on there, the people would see what the WWF was putting out and what the smaller promotions were putting out, and it was night and day. There was no competing with it. Even by the wrestlers that Vince would use, the big guys and the great bodies, he was putting out, the little promotion was putting out Sam the plumber. There was no comparison. And that was Vince's whole push in the beginning, was to not buy these territories out, not spend any money to buy them out, just push them out. And that's what he did.
He did buy a couple out, sort of.
He bought out Minneapolis, but guess what? They never got their money.
Oh, what?
They never got their money. So he made one, or maybe it was the Harts.
Maybe that was Calgary. Yeah.
He bought Calgary out. They got one payment and didn't get any more.
Oh yeah. They found
which I'm thinking, well, was that probably one of the, is that what got Brett through the door the first time?
Yeah, basically. Vince wasn't going to pay either way, but they found out that Bruce Hart was sort of queering the deal, I guess, by trying to reopen Stampede as an independent or something like that, or trying to run cards against Vince's shows. Yeah, I think they actually tried to. Bruce did, I think, and then the backer backed out, so they never even held the first show.
By him starting to say to do a backdoor kind of promotion, was that in violation of the agreement they had with the old man, Stu?
Yes.
So none of the Harts could do anything.
Yes, the story goes that Bruce just did it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm going to give you a few words from some of his contemporaries regarding Bob.
Yep.
If we were deciding on where to stop for lunch the days before catering, sitting together in the afternoon, this is Jim Ross, by the way, preparing our broadcast, doing a live national television show from ringside, I truly believe that I'm a better broadcaster and certainly a better man for having known and worked with Bob Caudle. Much like another important friend/broadcaster that came along later in my career, Bob made me feel at home in an organisation when many others there did not. Now, Jim Cornette wrote, I haven't tweeted about anyone passing in a long time. It just seems trivial for something like this, but Bob Caudle was one of the best men in wrestling. I want to say that. Arn Anderson said this, the wrestling industry has lost a class act, gentleman, and all-round nice man. Prayers to his family and all those who knew him. And Michael Hayes wrote, so sorry to hear of Bob Caudle passing. Bob was in rarefied air with Gordon and Lance. That type of announcing is mostly likely gone for good, and that's a shame. Now, that's another interesting sort of comparison, comparing Bob to Gordon Soley, Lance Russell, as three broadcasters who are always really understated kind of thing,
Yes.
but almost like immensely respected by the audience at the same time, which Michael Hayes is right. There's no one like that now. There's not been anyone
No,
like that for decades.
no, and those guys didn't rehearse. They didn't go over anything. They just went down and sat down with the format in front of them that just told them what was coming up, when to go to break, and if anything special they had to say, but they didn't rehearse anything, which was amazing to me, because to have a guy sit down and just almost cold turkey the first run, just almost do it. I don't think they could have done it any better, even if they had rehearsed it. And I think if you had asked them to rehearse it, they'd be offended. Like Lance Russell said, I've done this for 30 some odd years. You want me to rehearse this? And Jim Ross, same thing. But Jim Ross wasn't a professional announcer to start off with. But Lance was, and Bob was. They were professional announcers. But the way they adapted to wrestling is, and I do agree with who said there'll never be another announcer like them.
Oh, Hayes,
come along.
Michael Hayes.
Not Michael Hayes. I agree with him, because those guys, they were just picks. They were just good at what they did, and you used the word unflappable. You couldn't get them to lose their cool. And like I said, they wouldn't rehearse it. They just go out there and do it.